right, this is Comp T with your SE. I am your host, Bryan Young, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Mr. Tom Porter. How are you, sir?
Another day, another dollar, Brian. I'm good. How are you?
Another day, another dollar. Oh, boy. You know what? Doing good. Excited for our guest today. We actually have the privilege of actually having someone that's got a little bit more experience in this kind of broadcasting than us. Mr.
Ooh, you're dredging up old memories already, Mr. Young. Come on now. Ah,
You know,
you're supposed to
well,
wait
first of
until
all, so
later to do that.
I haven't even said your name yet. You can't talk till I say your name. You should
Oh,
know
shit.
that.
Okay, I'll stop.
Yeah, this is David Gutshall. He is he's a good friend of mine and also a coworker here at Cisco. But in a previous life, he does come from a background of radio broadcasting. So, David, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because
Oh,
I tried
my.
finding some clips and was unsuccessful, unfortunately.
Wow. So I like kill myself for ever bringing this up, but so way back in a former life, I used to work at a local computer store doing basically backroom tech, uh, building machines, fixing machines, break fix. This is 90s time frame.
Hmm.
And my boss decided that they wanted to help get the name of the store out there. Again, this is back when there were a lot of independent computer shops, different places.
No.
And so he bought airtime for a essentially what amounted to a radio show for troubleshooting, allowing listeners to call in and asking questions like, "Hey, my machine's doing X. What do I do about it?" And so age-wise, I was either 18 or 19. I'm not sure exactly which. But suddenly my boss rolls off of like the first episode and says, "Hey, Gutshall, you're going to do the rest of these." So here I am, literally wet behind the ears, right at this age, and I'm being dragged into doing essentially the host of this AM radio computer troubleshooting and um, call, right? And
Yeah.
what I learned real quick was, there's a lot of music bumpers, a lot of ads, a lot of commercials. So the hour-long radio broadcast is, I don't know, maybe only like 20 minutes of content. Like you only really are talking to people for like what 20. I think it was longer than that, but it was definitely under 40.
The time is
And
currently 10:22. Weather is 37 degrees, and now we go back to David.
there you go. Yep, yep, that's exactly right.
A lot of
So
that.
yeah, a lot of that. So yeah, it was just early on. I probably did it for, my head says I did it for a year, but it probably wasn't that long. And then you just stopped sponsoring it, and the thing went away. But great, just incredible experience early on. And yeah, what do they say? I have a face for radio. So there you go.
Well, I won't speak for Tom, but I know I do. I think we all have that face for
I
radio,
agree.
and of course that's why we're
Worked in
also on YouTube. So be
manufacturing, so
sure to
yeah.
follow us
Oof.
and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yeah, just turn the video off. Audio only, folks, really.
Well, that's how we started, and we stay true to our roots as an audio first podcast. So, all
There you
right,
go.
no, that's cool. I needed to bring that up because I thought that was so cool. I think it's one of those things that everyone that's listened to the radio at some point in the late '90s, right? They've heard of these kind of call in computer help shows,
Hmm.
and I thought that was just so cool that you were in there. But that's not what we're talking about today.
Nope.
Today we are talking about Industry 5.0. And David, if you could please tell us about your credentials and experience in the industrial IT, IoT manufacturing space. That will set the stage for what we're going to talk about.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, as you kind of heard from the earlier story, I've been kind of touching computers basically since I was knee high to a grasshopper. In fact, my first machine that I got was something my parents bought me. It was a TI 99 4A back in the probably 80 or 81, something like that. Anyway, so kind of coming out of high school, got my double E, and then I had been working for manufacturers basically starting actually while I was in college. My first kind of manufacturing gig was at while I was in college. And I worked for manufacturers on the customer side, primarily in the network engineering and network architecture space through kind of my customer career. But about 2/3 of the way before I joined Cisco, I flipped to the kind of the OT side, right? The other side of the concrete wall, that kind of process automation, engineering and integration space. And so I had learned essentially what amounted to traditional networking, but networking in a factory. And I was I'm going to call it the clickety clacker, as an old director used to call me, like, you're the clickety clacker, the guy on the keyboard. This is back when every keyboard made noise, right? And, and I had essentially cut my teeth on factory networking. And and I was the technologist. I was the engineer, right? In fact, I was a hair away from my route switch CCIE at one point. Passed the written, failed the labs because I was distracted, easily distracted, right? And because of the work we were doing in the factory, and
Right.
um, kind of the big kind of claim to fame in my career before joining Cisco is we took a plant at Harley Davidson that was in danger of closing in 2008, 2009, and it won Industry Week's Best Plant Award in 2013. And it won that because we were doing what we currently talk to customers about well before it was a thing anybody spoke about. So we were trying to converge IT and OT before anybody even called it OT. We were extracting data from machines before anybody really talked about extracting data from machines. We were, standing up automated guided vehicle systems with on corporate wireless before AGV companies were willing to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of early kind of work into what Cisco ultimately built. And then since joining Cisco, I've been here almost 8 years now, and for 7 to 7.5 of the 8 years, all I've worked with is manufacturers. So my role at Cisco really is to kind of leverage that background and that experience to talk to customers about, what are you going to run into? Through that kind of journey, I had to work with controls engineers and maintenance mechanics and unions and non-unions and general managers that didn't believe a darn thing of what we were doing and thought we were leaning too much over our skis. And so
Mm-hmm.
real comfortable talking up and down the stack, technically, non-technically, to just about any kind of audience. And that's basically what I do in my day job, right? Go to customer, talk about how Cisco can help, and how my background relates to what they're trying to do. And man, I got more war stories than you shake a stick at. So, I always say I've been there, bought that T-shirt before. I've been in your shoes. Let's talk about how I can help. So,
Yeah, and I think that's why I love working with you, and any chance I can get to bring you into a customer to talk IoT and OT, I jump at, because I've got a little bit, as you know, a little bit of history in
yeah,
manufacturing before,
yeah,
couple roles before this one. I was the network analyst for a manufacturing facility here in Connecticut, and all those things you just mentioned about the general managers, and the leaning over the skis and cost centers. Manufacturing, especially in this country, right, is very focused on both just in time, right, because we want to keep that inventory down. We want to keep the amount of money just kind of just sitting there. You don't want money just sitting there. You want it
nope.
to be used. You want it to be sold. You want it to be moving. And of course, the cost centers as well that roam around with that roll with that, because they will look at IT as just a cost. There's no benefit.
Hmm.
It's not giving us anything. It's not,
That's right.
if I buy this new $10,000 switch, is it going to make any more? Is it going to allow me to make more widgets per hour? No. But what we can do beyond that, that's where the value lies. And of course, having someone come from your experience that can connect at that level and meet them there and say, I've gone through this. These are the things that you're looking at. These are the things you're concerned about. I totally get that. Here's what other customers have done. Here's the best practices. Here's why Cisco is invested in this space and giving you,
Hmm.
whether it's hardware and or software, that's purpose built for the IoT OT space,
A-
and
abs-
got to connect at that
Absolutely.
level. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean you made a comment that it doesn't directly translate, the switch doesn't directly translate into additional widgets. And I would argue, back from my previous life, we had three primary asks that we were trying to accomplish. One was I need to be able to build this new, I'll call it more complicated network, and I need to have less people supporting it in the future than I do now. Two, it needs to be flexible enough that the business can make whatever decisions they want to make. Think line balancing or moving an assembly cell from here or there or new model launch. And they didn't want to have to engage IT as a project anymore. It's like, look, this should be a change inside of our factory, not this big, huge project. And then finally, the last one was we had to operationalize the network to allow the business to basically to react to the speed at which, they were moving. Those were kind of our three big careabouts. And I would argue that without Cisco's industrial networking equipment and capabilities that were just beginning to sort of show up, we wouldn't have been able to accomplish any of those three because suddenly with the SD cards, I could stock replacement switches in the tool crib. And
Mm-hmm.
I could give maintenance and instructions that said, look, if you think you need to swap the switch out, take the SD card out, dismount the switch from the DIN rail, go get a new one out of the tool crib, go put it back on, slide the SD card in, and see if it works or not. And I mean, that's huge, right? What do? They power everything off, they power it back on. If it doesn't work, they start replacing components. And if
Yep.
they think the network's the problem, so there was no MACD, there was no change request, there was no ticket to IT that was required to do that. So that's the one thing. And then the second part, and I think this is even, in my mind, it was a bigger deal. And that is we combined the switching and PLC point IO all in a singular cabinet and made all of the configurations identical outside of the management address. So you could actually look on the bottom of the control enclosure and see the management address, and it had a unit number. Unit number was, let's say, 150. Well, 150 corresponded to the last octet, and so you knew the address of the thing you were looking at. And
Mm-hmm.
so, suddenly I've got identical configurations everywhere. I could give maintenance a pile of SD cards with new unit numbers. They needed to add a station. All they did was grabbed a new one from the tool crib, slid an SD card in it, threw that sucker up, and boom, online we went.
Mm-hmm.
And that operationalization, empowering the business, that could not have happened. Honest to goodness, guys, it couldn't have happened without Cisco's stuff. Um, and so, in that regard, it absolutely directly translated into more units per hour and less downtime because there
Less
was
downtime for sure.
less downtime because it used to require this big, massive, undertaking of, okay, open a ticket. No, that's too big of a deal. You need to open a project. I forget what it was called. It was like a project requisition request, and it was
Mm-hmm.
just anyway.
And the people that are in charge of these lines, they're used to being able to just swap out a component, fix something, troubleshoot. They know
Right.
that machine in and out. Like I think of all the in that manufacturing position I was in, they knew those machines. They knew everything about them. They knew when they needed to change the bits, or they needed to recalibrate it, or it was not operating the right way, and they had no problem opening up the cabinet, unscrewing stuff, taking components out, and being able to, I don't know if this is a word, componentalize
Yeah,
that
I like
that
that. Right.
operation, to be able to
Yeah,
be like, hey, this is a very high tech piece of equipment, right? That is outside of the scope of what I do, right? It's not just a simple relay or a transformer or resistor, whatever, right? This is a network switch. Has a lot of components in it, and there's a specific configuration to get it to run. But what you were able to do is just allow them to pop that SD card out, swap the hardware, pop it in, done. Oh, it's working great. That was the problem.
absolutely. There's even a cultural component. Din or rack mounted switches, right? The business, the operations, maintenance, they see that as an IT component. Like do
Mm-hmm.
not touch, and it kind of gives I'm going to call it this, it kind of throws this divider in. Whereas our industrial switches are DIN rail mounted, they sit next to their gear. It feels like theirs. It doesn't feel like IT. And so that like, do not underestimate the cultural shift that happens when you try and get folks, to your point, that are used to owning everything inside of the machine, and now suddenly you're putting a component in there that they don't completely control. The fact that it's their form factor, that you're giving them the ability to basically do tier one and tier two, I'm going to call it troubleshooting,
Mm-hmm.
lowers that cultural catalyst curve so much. Really
Yeah,
does.
that's a really good point. Just meeting them where they're at, right?
Yes,
In
meeting
terms of
them where
that
they
form
are.
factor.
Yes. Hmm.
it's
That's
it's
awesome.
interesting.
So,
It's an interesting topic because I'm going to give you an example. I have two customers, big manufacturing customers, and that's actually one of the things they complain about. Most of my contacts are obviously in the IT. We're trying
Sure.
to
Yep.
expand,
Yep.
to beyond that. But that's one of the common complaints I actually get from my customers is defining that line between where IT stops and
Hmm.
really the plant, managers and operators
Hmm.
take over. And it's actually been hard sometimes to try to broker a closer relationship between the two. Like, yeah, look, there's a lot of things we can actually simplify on both sides of the spectrum here,
Hmm.
just by taking a look at changing some of these things. One of the common problems, and I'm sure you guys are aware of, is like a lot of the tools these guys use like 192.168.0.1, right, as the
mm-hmm.
little with self-contained network, for that piece of equipment. And a lot of times they don't change that once it's
Hmm.
installed. So now you've got a
Right.
whole bunch of other things, so that's a burden for IT, right? Okay, we got to figure out a way for make that communicate with the rest of the network. They may have 100 other components that have that exact same IP scheme, and how do we make that work? So yeah, it's interesting. That's an interesting concept of putting something that they're used to in their own environment that that might make that easier for them to consume.
Yeah, and you said an interesting point there around trying to figure out kind of where IT stops and where OT begins. And I'm gonna double down on the cultural comment here and say too many customers look at this as a technical question. Where should IT stop and where should OT begin? Or where should, let's say your maintenance group owns the kind of that networking stack at the bottom here. Maybe your controls team owns it. Every customer is different. And I would argue that what you actually need to ask yourself is organizationally, where's the split belong? Not technically. And then organizationally, once you kind of figure that out, then you can, if you're, let's say you're re-architecting a plant or doing it again, then you can architect it to kind of align with how the organization wants to sort of manage it. Because I've seen all different versions, right? I've seen IT own the entire way down. I've seen IT literally have like their version of what I'm going to call an IDF, and then OT, the process side,
Yep.
have an exact duplicate IDF with like a big layer two trunk here.
Yep.
And then the only reason they do that is they both want sort of ACL control of traffic. And
Hmm.
because you want the ability, basically both have to agree now. So IT has to kind of sign off, this is what we're going to allow, and then the process side signs off like that. So, obviously that customer has to have a deep manufacturing IT bench. But for that customer, it makes sense, right? Because they've got what I'm going to call it networking team that maybe is more responsible for again line technologies versus traditional back office technologies.
Hmm.
So in my mind, that split and ultimately the architecture kind of at that edge point is more dependent upon an organization and not kind of what the network looks like, if you will.
Hmm.
Good stuff. Yeah, and I think Tom, to go back to your point too, that kind of the culture of, as I was talking about before, those guys they know I just have to slap in a new part, I just mount it on a rail,
Hmm.
and they have that idea of well, if I need blank, I'm going to buy it out of my cost center and I'm going to install it. I don't need to ask anyone other than maybe finance for permission. Maybe it's in my budget. I don't even have to do that, right? I'm just given a certain amount of dollars a quarter to spend on expansion and whatever. So when you introduce something like the computer network that is a lot more complex and is reliant on all the other pieces of the network, right, to
Mhm.
function, that concept of just I'm going to buy the box, I'm going to slap it in and it's going to work, it's ingrained in them. So
Yeah.
what's going to end up happening is, as we know, you're going to run into issues if you do that over and over again without notifying IT, and that will, they don't like doing that sometimes, right? Every customer is different, and when we're talking culture, right, things change. So that may not be the case for everyone, but it is definitely something that I think has impaired IT's ability to really get into that uncarpeted space and work side by side with those people in that are responsible for those pieces. So, with all that being said, the title of this podcast episode is Industry 5.0. Now, I would love to know what industries 1 through 4 was, but really, David, I want to go into this and understand what is Industry 5.0, how is it different from the other ones, where are we at? Because I'd imagine that it's very manufacturing manufacturing in general is not always bleeding edge when it comes to technology, right? They get an asset, they run it for 20, 30, 40 years if they can,
Hmm.
and bleed it completely dry to get as much revenue back from it as possible.
That's right. It's
So
paid
they're
for
not
and it
going to always.
works, right?
Right, exactly. So they're not going to be quick to adopt something that's brand new that,
Hmm.
let's face it, may require a little bit more troubleshooting and hand holding and everything else. So let's dive into this, David. What can you tell me about Industry 5.0?
Yeah, so let's level set on kind of what the sort of the definition of 4.0 generally is. And by the way, in some cases, right, this is like lies, damn lies, and statistics. You're going to go out there and look, and there's going to be various different definitions that are close. So, if you listen to me and you go, well, that's not the definition I use, I will probably come back to you and say, you are also right. So, these are what I'm going to call generally loose terms, right? So you can think of Industry 4.0 is taking the data that all of our different systems and subsystems and similar were making, and instead of like using it in the moment and tossing it. So think about a robotic cell from like the mid 70s. That robotic cell was using data in the moment to make decisions about where its position was in space and what step of the process it was on, and is it at its home point and similar, and it would use the data in the moment and it would throw it away. It wasn't historized, it wasn't recorded, no other system knew about it. And once it was kind of back to its home point, ready for its next operation, there was no knowledge or thought about the data that just happened from its last operation. Industry 4.0 is really the evolution of that concept of like, hey, maybe we start recording all of the operations of the robot. Maybe we begin to look at that data in new and unique ways. Maybe we compare that cell with the other 4 identical cells and try and figure out why cell 1 tends to perform better than cell 2, or cell 2 requires more preventive maintenance operations more often, even though they were bought at the same time. Or again, leveraging data in new and unique ways, whether inside of the facility or between facilities and what have you, right? So that's essentially that's like the summary version of 4. 5, I would argue, is still being sort of fleshed out, but the general concept of 5.0 is about, I'm going to say maybe 4 different things. One, it's being more people centric than we've been in the past. And people centric, what I really mean there is beginning thinking about how do I put people in places to do higher value added work? How do I automate places where maybe I didn't automate yesterday and now I don't need a human there? And so now let's start thinking about where do we put our people in the best places to succeed? That's kind of the first thing. The second thing is just being more sustainable across the board. So, I think every public company that you have today probably has a sustainability plan. it may or may not be directly tied to the manufacturing process. So it'd be like bringing those kind of concepts, sort of down the stack to ensure that we're being, I'll call it sustainable. The third is around true carbon neutral targets that companies globally are going to meet, mainly because of some of the EU regulations that are being passed that are going to require companies and similar to hit that to hit those targets. And so, how our industry is going to be able to have to change and change their focus and how they run their business in order to meet that, right? And I think finally, the kind of the fourth area is we've been talking a lot about leveraging AI in the process to make decisions, but it's been a lot of, to use the kind of the term, it's been a lot of all hat, no cattle. A lot of promises, not a lot of really good deliveries on it. Industry 5.0 is finally going to be leveraging all of the crazy, ridiculous models that we're all seeing coming to light, I feel like daily now, and pushing them into manufacturing and have it not be a science project. I think AI and Industry 4.0 has been mainly about AI science projects. With 5, it's not going to be science projects anymore. So those are the main areas and main focus for 5. Although I'm sure you could go out there and, I don't know, I won't throw any names under the bus, but look at some of your large business process houses and business change houses and similar consultancy firms, and they probably all have a different opinion because it's still being firmed up, right?
Right. But it sounds to me like you would need to kind of meet at least some of the requirements of Industry 4.0 in order to get into 5.0. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely, that would be accurate. I would argue that that's actually what Cisco's bread and butter is, right? And I'll reference a slide that I use talking to customers right now. So it was a Deloitte survey where they asked customers, like, what over the next 12 months, I think the way it's phrased is, over the next 12 months, what technologies do you believe are going to be needed in order to meet, your operational efficiency targets? And the top 2 that pop out well above everything else, from AI to blockchain to quantum computing to 5G to name your buzzword, the top 2 that pop out well above the rest, like 15 to 20% above the rest, are automation and robotics. That's the first one, and data analytics. What do you need in order to automate? What do you need in order to be able to leverage data? And again, analytics is basically a buzzword for leveraging data to make decisions. What do you need for that? You need a network.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to connect to the assets. You've got to connect to the assets securely. You got to be able to remote into the asset. All of the things that Cisco not only does well, but we've been doing it for a long time. And so, right, that foundation's required for Industry 4.0. So spot on, Bryan.
Yeah. No, it's, I mean, you need that data, and the means of getting the data, first of all, is what type of sensors and feedback can I get from the device, cell, whatever, right? Whether that's something just like, counting the number of widgets I'm producing, or going a couple steps further and monitoring things like temperature, RPMs, current draw, right? We all know that if a motor is set to a specific RPM and it's drawing more current than usual, it means it's fighting harder. It's maybe the bit is getting worn. Stuff like that, which can help with, as we talked about, automation. Maybe we change the preventative maintenance schedule around a little bit, and that can increase production and or increase the bottom line. So being able to collect that data, whether it's analog or digital, and then, to your point, getting it to where it needs to be securely, and ensuring that it gets to where it needs to be. And this was one of the things that I loved back when, and I don't even know if I can say the name anymore. Actually, I don't even know if I remember it now. Was it Kinetic? Was that?
Yeah, Kinetic. Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a
good or
dirty
bad
word to
memory. I'm
say
not
now.
sure which. Right.
But the idea was there, and I'm like, this is cool. Like, okay, making sure not only it was taking the network to the next level of not just transmitting the data, but actually ensuring that it got there. And if it couldn't get to where it needed to get, holding on to it until that resource was available. Like, what when a network doesn't do that? A network is basically a highway. It's like, it's not a highway and a parking lot. Um, it blew my mind, that I thought it was the right thing to do. And things have shifted, right? And Kinetic was no longer, where is Kinetic right now? Is it?
Yeah, so there's a few bits and piece parts from an idea standpoint that we kept. So actually, let
Right.
me, since you brought that term up, I'll touch on that for a bit, right? So in my mind, Kinetic had two primary problems. One, it was early. So I think it was, I think if you went back and you kind of started doing that now, I think the market would be in a better place. And two, it was too many different Lego blocks inside of Cisco, including some third-party components. And so it was
Yeah.
sort of a zombie, right? You had a bunch of different third-party components, and, combined with the market not being quite ready, and it just, yeah, it kind of fell flat. But to your point, the vision of what that vision is, it was just early. It was an early vision. Um, the pieces that I call it, the piece that we've kept, and it's much more inside of Cisco's wheelhouse, is the edge intelligence component. So part of the Kinetic stack was the cloud to on-prem connector that gave you the ability to make decisions about how long you kept data, what data that you sent, where it might go. And so that edge intelligence component that, let's say, I'll use an example for a second. Maybe you record, I'll use your example. Maybe you record temperature because temperature is important to your process, and maybe the PLC records it at every scan time. So you get literally a temperature value like every 100 milliseconds. Well, that's cool, but what are you going to do? You're going to
A lot of
stream
data.
right? You're going to stream the value to your cloud provider once every because they're monetizing you every bit. Oh heck yeah, Mr. Customer, send us every one of those bits, baby.
Bring
Historize
it
every
on.
single thing, right? Bring it on. Whereas, and boy, that's a talk track separately that I would love to get down maybe on a future podcast. Um, but you know, that's not only potentially a lot of intellectual property because somebody can see with how varying your temperature is of your facility. Maybe for purposes of argument, maybe we only want that once per hour. That's sufficient. So
Right.
I would be able to essentially put an EI connector in and say, look, sit there and record every value over the hour, and at the end of the hour, average the value and send to average. That is the kind of control we can still now do with that edge intelligence product. Um, and I would say that maybe the cloud providers, let's just say that's probably not their most popular product because again, it's interfering potentially with the monetization of every one of those bits of data. I'll make one other comment there and just say a lot of times the reason why it doesn't necessarily come up is because the folks paying the cloud bill are not the folks that care about the data storing. And so if in some future world, as IT and OT combine, suddenly the same group that's paying that bill sees that, I could very easily see the cloud to on-prem pendulum swinging back a little bit because I think
Hmm.
once the actual cost associated with, look, the cloud's not magic. All you're doing is giving control up basically of, you're saving some money on the personnel front potentially, but you're just kind of passing that along to somebody else. And so again, storage isn't free, whether you're doing it or somebody else is doing it.
Yep. I want to push back. So, two things that are just making me laugh. First of all, I want to push back on the first thing you said about this, that where temperature is important to your process. And I
Hmm.
would push back on that and say, I think temperature is always important to your process, even if it's just ambient temperature, right? Because you and I have talked about this a lot, right? And going back to the case of things like preventative maintenance and
Hmm.
whatnot, being able to determine and visualize and see and collect the data on the fact that I can produce more widgets when my ambient temperature is between 68 and 72 degrees. If it's higher than 72, my production goes down, or my production may go up, but my reject goes up as well. right?
True. Heck, it
So
might be because Jane hates when it's hot in the plant. I mean, to your point, right? Just don't know.
yeah, you don't know what you don't what you the
Right.
data you don't collect. So I would push back and say even if temperature isn't a necessary component of the process of the widget you're building, I would argue and say I think it's still important to keep an eye on that for other reasons.
Yep.
You may
Great
find out.
argument.
Yeah.
Yeah, great
The other
argument.
thing I wanted to mention was I'm cracking up here. So I don't know if I showed this to you, but I've been working on this little project here, and it's it's an oil tank level reader. And I'm going to try to get this on the camera. I'll just unplug it here. So for those listening only, you're going to have to go on the YouTube channel to see this. It's a tiny little ESP8266 controller connected
Okay.
to a little LiDAR sensor, and wrote the code in Adreno. ChatGPT helped me out with that.
Thanks, ChatGPT. Yep.
Thanks, ChatGPT. And I'm using a third-party service called Blink, and this just streams the measurements that the LiDAR sensor reads and sends it up to Blink. Now, I'm the reason I bring this up is because you mentioned about sending the values every couple milliseconds. I don't know exactly how often I'm sending the value of this tank reader, but I know it's way too often. I think
Sure.
it's
Right.
once every 5 seconds, and I'm like,
Ooh.
yeah, I don't need that. It's a little bit of data. It's not a problem, and it doesn't cost anything for me because I only have the one device. If I made this into a business and had multiple customers and hundreds or thousands of tanks that I monitored, then it would cost me a little something. But for a little project like this, no big deal. But I was thinking about this process of, okay, this thing is constantly reading the value of the measurement, right? The LiDAR sensor is constantly measuring the distance, and I don't necessarily need it to do that. I mean, I may not want to just check it every 5 minutes because maybe maybe it was a weird value or something reflected weird because oil was sloshing around a little bit, something weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I just have it do a set of 5 or 6 measurements every 5 minutes and then give me the average value of that and send that up, right? And especially for something like an oil tank reader for oil tank level monitor for home heating oil.
Like once a day is sufficient. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like I'm not gonna burn through 100 gallons in a day
No,
and
that's
be
right.
concerned. So,
Right.
just again, I don't know if I shared that with you. I talked to you about it,
You
but
didn't.
I just thought it was funny, and I figured I'd share. So, yeah, it's fun stuff. Always be mindful of the data you're sharing and sending, and of course, especially when you're sending it to a cloud service, be mindful of how often you're doing that because
Mm-hmm.
you may not need to.
Yeah, and,
So,
and be mindful. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say today's podcast brought to you by Bryan's oil temp sensors.
Right. Right.
going on sale shortly.
Right.
Price to be determined.
Right.
For more information, reach out at hello@conft.show.
Yeah, right. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's a good practice just generally. I mean, even for people in general, is always be mindful of the data you're sharing, the data you're sending in the cloud, the data you're filling in the form. You know, I would argue, oversharing is always bad, because the more that it's out there in the more places potentially could get breached. And, your information's out there, although some buddies of mine, if they ever watch this, Jimmy and Trevor would both say, all your data is already all over the place. So, don't even worry about it. But
It's already
I'm
gone.
very, very mindful of, oversharing. You should be mindful of it on the corporate side as well as, always ask yourself, do they need this?
Yeah.
Can you push back?
That's a
Right?
good point. Can I share with Tom and the audience what you had said when you first hopped on? The question you'd asked me along this
Sure.
mindset?
Yeah.
So Tom, David asked, he goes, we're not going to be recording the video too, right? And I said, oh yeah, no, it's going to be on YouTube afterwards. He goes, damn it. So we may just, if in the final edit of this video, David is just a static emoji happy face, he's concerned, and understandably so in this day and age, about his privacy, and that's what we did. So I'm not sure if we have to go that route or not,
I don't
which
know if I have a bit emoji.
that's totally up to
What
you.
they call them, bit emojis. I need to make a bit emoji of myself.
Well, you can do that. You just have to upload about 50 photos of yourself,
Right, right,
and
right, right. Right, right. Back to the oversharing. What is the devil I know better than the devil I don't? Yeah.
I'm not going to name the social media network that did this. I'm sure you can Google it. But there was a social networking company, a pretty big one, that a couple of years ago was trying to kind of battle this whole thing, the issue with revenge porn, where you
Mm.
send an illicit photo of yourself to a significant other at the time, and then things go sour, and that person wants to get back at you and decides to share that intimate photo with everyone else. And the solution that this company came up with was send all of those illicit photos to us, and we'll tell you if we find it anywhere in our network. And I'm like,
Oh my.
now I don't think they actually uploaded the photo. I'm sure they just read the but still, it's like, come on, really?
My
You're
goodness.
you're missing the point.
I can say this as an over 40s married guy with two kids, and that is, you know what the lesson is, kids? Don't take naked pictures of yourselves and send them to your significant other, like after only a week.
Right.
Yeah.
Or ever. I mean,
Or
come on.
ever. Like, come on, go buy yourself an old Polaroid. You don't need to Google that, maybe somebody. You
They
know,
still make them. My daughter got a little. I don't think it's made by Polaroid. I think it's made by Fujifilm.
okay.
But it's an instant. You take the picture and the little thing pops out, and you shake it like you're not supposed to, and
Right,
the
everybody
picture
shakes
develops in
them,
front
right?
of you. What was hilarious was
Yeah,
there was everyone shakes. You're not supposed to, right? But
right,
it was
right.
hilarious because when she first got it, it's got this cool little mechanism where you press a button and it extends out the lens and it opens the protective cover, but it wasn't opening the protective cover and we didn't realize it. So I swear she took 3 pictures where it was just all black, and we're like, I didn't think it was that dark in this room. And I look at it and I go, oh, the damn protective thing is still closed. We had to, adjust it and mess around with it. But yes, do not take photos and send them then, because they'll be out there. This public service announcement brought to you by your friends at the CompT
The
with
more you
Heresy.
know.
Dun, dun,
Yeah, right. The more you know, right?
dun.
I don't think that's a
Well,
thing
we've
anymore.
gotten off track here from preventative maintenance to nudes. Well, this is why I love this show. this
Right.
is why we still got downloads, even though we didn't record or publish a new episodes for over a year and a half. So, which, by the way, thank you for those that continued sharing and listening. All right, so knowing that, going back to our original topic here, knowing that the requirements of 4.0, or at least a subset of them, is really a requirement to move into the Industry 5.0 bucket. What would you say in terms of percentage or even percentage in terms of the customers that you've worked with, where they're at that point now, where they've checked the 4.0 boxes?
Yeah, yeah.
What's the
I would
adoption rate?
say, yeah, I think, well, so there, I'm going to change let me define adoption rate. So you can have customers that are totally leaning into the concept, right? But they're just, to your point earlier, manufacturing doesn't want to change. They're not where they need to be maturity wise, even though they need to know they need to go there. So adoption of the concept, knowing that they need to go there, is above 90%. So more than 9 out of 10 customers that I talk to are kind of like, look, we totally buy into what you're saying. We need to get there. Now, I realize, right, that there's some bias here in the self-selection process. You have a customer willing to engage with us. Generally, they're engaging because they want to talk about this topic. So, I'm sure the actual adoption rate is probably more like 60 is my hunch. But of the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, Fortune 2000 set, it's probably north of 80 to 90. Now,
Okay.
where are they? That's the real question. And where they are is less than probably 20% are totally there the whole way, right? And that's again back to these networks grew organically. They acquired that company over there and that plant. This plant over here runs 24 by 7. They can't change anything. That plant over there The general manager, they all own their own P&L. The general manager doesn't want to talk to IT. He or she hates IT, right? There's all kinds of different reasons why companies just aren't there. I think the most common thing that we generally or try to get customers towards is at least settle on sort of a strategic architecture, your North Star that you want to move to. And then once you kind of settle on that, then you slowly move your locations there. When you build a new plant, a greenfield plant, that's the what you leverage. And that I think everybody that we talk to is that has kind of adopted it, nodded their head. They're somewhere on that journey towards moving everybody there, but not many are there, guys, really.
Do you think that with the very popular stuff around AI, that's going to be a driving factor in getting the remaining 40% to
I,
start considering this?
I think it eventually will because if I go back to when we first sort of started talking the power of digital transformation to our customers, one of the things that we harped on regularly was this concept of, you don't know where your disrupting competitor is going to come from. So either you get on this train now or you're going to find yourself disrupted tomorrow. And I think the fact that it takes time to migrate these facilities to it um, kind of self limits the amount of kind of disruption from a competitor around the corner that suddenly snaps their fingers and are done. There's a limited amount of that can happen. To your point, I think this is potentially going to allow a company that has a couple plants that are kind of there. They're going to maybe be able to run rings around, their competitors once kind of we settle on some again models that are very very useful in manufacturing. Um, yeah, so I think I'm always long-winded, right? That was my long-winded yes.
No worries there. Um, no, I think this is awesome. It's an exciting place to be, and I think especially with the stuff around AI, right? There's definitely a lot of concerns, and David, you and I were talking about those off air, right?
Yeah.
But just even going back to my little pet project here, I would have had no freaking clue where to begin with writing the code to do this. And the fact that I was just able to use something like a chat GPT to say, write me code that uses this controller, this model, LiDAR sensor, and, write me an Adreno sketch that does that. And it's just like, I'm like,
Just
okay,
incredible, right?
I want to change it to calculate. So take that measurement and calculate it into number of gallons remaining based on, the size of the tank. And it did it all. And it got me about 99% of the way there. There might have been some tweaks that I made there, but it definitely got me a lot further along, a lot faster than the typical way of looking up information today, which is going to a search engine, Google, whatever, and typing in the term and going through a couple different articles and stealing bits here and there. It aggregates that a bit. So
Yeah, I mean the
very curious to
my
see where it's going to
concern
go.
on the yeah my concern on the taking it back to manufacturing, right? Because that's kind of what we're talking about here. My concern is the impact on early in career roles
Yep.
that you get those early in career roles and learn a lot about you learn a lot about the company, you learn a lot about processes. Yeah, it feels like, excuse my French, shit work initially, but that is useful and valuable to growing your career. When suddenly, I don't need an early in career salesperson to be able to write an email to a VP. I had ChatGPT, by the way, write an email to a VP, and I gave it a kind of a specific prompt, and I was shocked at how good it was. In fact,
Yep.
I would argue it was better than the early in career salesperson would have written. To your point, right? When suddenly, I don't need a code jockey to write me an outline anymore. I can get the outline directly from ChatGPT. So now I can just go to the higher, longer in career folks and get them to do that. there's disruption all over the place. Imagine a scenario inside of, let's say, quality, where the early in career quality person, all they're doing all day is sitting at the SPC system and either entering data or looking at data or number crunching data. That can be done via. I mean, the problem is early in career salespeople become later in career salespeople, or early in career individuals become later in career individuals. The disruption on the front end, it will feel great in the near term, and we are going to be effed in the long term if this disrupts too much. And we're only a quarter to 2 quarters into this being mainstreamed.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 more years. My God.
Yep.
I mean, it's not even just manufacturing, man. Look at like
Oh,
McDonald's, for example. I mean, why do we
Yep.
need cashiers anymore? We've got all those touch screens. Pretty soon you could just speak. I'm pretty sure you drive through at some point you'll be able to just speak what you want to order. Chat
They
GPT
have
will
they have a
listen to
McDonald's
that.
that does that now.
Do
Yeah,
they?
they had one like I. It was hilarious because it was absolutely horrible. It was like, they,
Still
you
a
know,
well,
beta.
the promise is still being worked on, right?
yeah, it's still a work in process. But I mean, you think of all the times you call up customer service, right? And instead of just having the touch tones of, for reception, press 1.
Right.
Now it's in a few short words. Tell me what your problem is, and
Oh,
it's that interaction, and it's something that I've seen across the board, not just in things like um, customer service, call center kind of scenarios, but even with self-driving vehicles, right? It's that interaction between the artificial intelligence or the algorithms or whatever, the computing part of it, and the human nature part of it. For example, if I have a full self-driving car and I come up to a four-way intersection where there's a pedestrian crosswalk, you and we all know the rules, right? The rule is pedestrians get the right of way, right? We know that. And the computer knows that. But what the computer would not be able to pick up on is if we all came in, they're not going to be able to pick up, at least right now, I'm sure in the future that'll change, the body language. How is that person that's standing at the edge of that crosswalk looking? Are they even looking at the crosswalk? Are they checking their phone? Are they waiting for someone? Are they running across? All those different things that we are able to process because we're looking at it visually, that a self-driving car with cameras or LiDAR and an algorithm and machine learning, it's not going to pick up on those nuances. And to take that a couple steps further, right? We know the rules of the road when it comes to yielding, but again, there's certain kind of quote unquote, I'll call it body language, right, that you will use with your vehicle, right, where you're going to maybe be a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more casual, flash your lights, wave your hand, something like that a computer today would have a harder time interpreting and applying that to the model. So I think
yeah.
that's where we end up coming into those kind of clash scenarios where you're yelling at your phone saying customer service, or just banging on
All
the
right,
zero
banging
key,
on the zero
hoping
key. Yeah, right. We've
that
all done
the
it.
system has an override in there that you can
Right,
cheat, right? And there's a whole website to that. I don't even remember what it's called. I'm sure someone that's listening will write it in the comments somewhere.
right,
But there's a whole website of like how to get to customer service quickly on all those different companies. So you just type it in, you're like, okay, just press
right,
0, 1, and 4, and you're good.
right.
Um, but it's that intersection of the human and the computer that's always the point of contention, always the point that needs to be worked on.
Absolutely. Yeah. I suspect so. I suspect the problem is going to continue to be corner cases. And to
Mm-hmm.
your point on the pedestrian, right, there's corner cases that are happening every day, all over the world on the self-driving car front. The analogy I use is, or the example I use is like, there's a forest fire. Your house is in the development of forest fire. Suddenly, it just moves really quickly, and you've got 2 minutes to get out of your house. You pack everything up, you get in that car, and you know what? The street is a mess. It's smoke. There's flames. There's trees down in the places in the street. You basically can't see anything, but you know your road. So you drive out of that thing, you drive through it, and you get to a point where you can tell there's something up ahead. You may or may not hit it, but sitting where you are, you're going to die. So you floor it, close your eyes, hope to freaking, whoever that you make it through, and you do, and everything's ducky, and you get your family out safe. Congratulations, you. You've never seen that scenario before. You're never going to see that
Yep.
scenario again. And yet, that car had no ability, even with every sensor known to man, because of the conditions on the road. It didn't even have the data to make the decision. Because, so, again, corner case probably will never happen to anybody listening to this or anybody that 100 times over. But those corner cases happen daily.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know until the AI gets legitimately sentient and it's got human personhood and it becomes an American or an EU citizen or similar, that we're going to be able to give that control up. I just don't
Mm.
see it.
Yep.
It's the reason why there's always that emergency stop button, right? There's always that I'm going to intervene.
I'm going to intervene. Yeah, yeah, that a great job bringing it back to manufacturing, right? Think about systems, right? Uh, Analogy going back to manufacturing, right? One of the things we talk about is our ability to make um, what I'll call the clamp and stop traffic decisions. We can automate that through potentially ICE, right? Maybe our visibility tool like Cybervision sees something bad happening and it informs ICE, hey, this bad thing is happening. And then you can turn ICE on to say, block that right now.
Mm-hmm.
The percentage of customers, guys, that turn this on in manufacturing is somewhere much closer to zero than 1%.
Mm.
Basically, no one turns it on because they all want the human in the loop. They still want the human making the decision.
Mhm.
So we're a human species. We're hardwired to have a human make decisions, even when the human is potentially slow, potentially makes the wrong decision in the moment, potentially falls asleep at the switch. All of the bad things that happen because of humans, we still generally want the human in the loop at the in that crucible. I think that says something maybe about us.
We're doomed.
And so, well, maybe, or that
That's
hopefully somebody
an
will be
episode for
at the.
another day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Now on our philosophical podcast episode, whatever. Uh,
I was talking with my son's hockey parents last night. We were I don't know. The conversation went in all different directions. But the topic of, do you remember when the Northeast, I think it was late 90s, I want to say 97, 98 timeframe, where there was a pretty major power outage that happened in the Northeast. I think it came
mm,
down from Canada and came in right outside of New York City. Um, and we'll have to look it up what it was, but basically what stopped that, it was a cascade effect because there was, I guess, low power lines because of extra current draw from being a hot day in the summer. Some of the high voltage, high transmission lines touched the trees, shorted out, caused more load on other lines, which did the same thing, and it was a cascade effect.
2003.
Was it 2003? Okay, so I was only off by 5 or 6 years. So, um, cascade effect. The actual point of stoppage was there was someone that noticed it and was like, "Oh, that's a
Mm,
trend. I know what's happening here." And they manually intervened. If they hadn't,
wow.
I think they said the entire eastern seaboard would have gone down and it would have taken
Wow.
longer to recover. Because, every time you have a down line with a short like that, you're popping a fuse. You got to go
Yep.
replace those fuses. And if you're
Yep.
going to have thousands or tens of thousands of fuses popping, that's going to take a while to replace. Hopefully, you have enough on hand.
Yeah. Right.
Um, so, it just goes back to that whole, human or some manual intervention as that last line of defense.
Yeah.
Thinking over to my 3D printer too, right? There's limit switches on it. But they still crash. I mean, even in manufacturing, there are machine crashes all the time. With regardless of what safety measures are put in, there's still an edge case where something happens and that machine crashes and does something it's not supposed to.
Yeah, that so to your point, right? That was an edge case that was never trained for. It was never, no one, an AI model, let's say, that was making decisions would never have gotten the data to be able to see it. And a human was making inferences based on incomplete data, but managed to catch it.
Mm-hmm.
And so think about, again, back to those, call them corner cases. It's the corner cases that are going to be problematic for, um, every industry, right? Manufacturing, other industries. The same problem that you just mentioned is going to happen on a line with the model they train. And for 99% of the time, when things are going well, it's going to be amazing. The 1% where it's not is where, we're still going to have humans in a loop, or most likely the entirety of my kid's career still, probably.
Mm-hmm.
But note, we said humans in the loop, maybe not humans line side actually doing work. They may become, what I'm going to call, like AI monitors or process
Clickety
monitors.
clackers, right? Clickety
Clickety
clackers.
clackers, that's right, with a big fat e-stop next to them. Like,
Yep.
stop the presses. Um, yeah.
Bryan, I see a use for one of these.
Oh my god. Oh, Tom pulls out the Meraki button. Oh man, that's hilarious. Yeah, like that, Dave. That's a reference to our last episode where we were talking about the new Meraki button and all the cool things it
Okay.
can do, like, you know, things that switches can do currently today.
Sure. Right.
let's
Yeah, you could.
digitize it and wrap it in
Yeah.
APIs and call it
Right.
cloud service to do something that
Somebody build an andon system with it and
yeah.
sell it as an andon system.
There you go. There you go.
David, going back to something we were talking about a little earlier, where as a consequence of where even with really Industry 4.0 has taken us, and then into 5.0, where losing those lower level positions, those entry level positions,
Hmm.
not just in
Yeah.
manufacturing, but like I said, in retail,
Oh
food
yeah.
industry.
Right.
Does 5.0 do anything to potentially address that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so that's the whole point of the idea of being more people centric again. So what we're going to be doing. So we're in this sort of really weird spot right now. It's an inflection point in my mind. So think about the things that are kind of coming together at the same time. One, nobody can find enough people for anything. You name the role, you name the industry, you name the entry level to later in career, everyone's short of people. So
Mm-hmm.
what that's doing in factories is it's causing companies to go, well, I didn't want to automate this process because I have four people that are doing it today. They're 5 years from retirement. I'm going to let them keep doing it the old-fashioned way, and then I'll worry about it later. And oh, by the way, I've got other retired people behind them, so we'll just keep this process in place to, oh my gosh, I have to automate this because I don't have a choice. I don't have people.
Mm,
So companies are looking at ways to automate because we're short of people. But now, to your point, continue that through. If you don't start thinking about the impact on the person, we are going to find ourselves in this self-perpetuating nasty where we've pulled the people out of the loop and now we have nobody to actually backfill them because there's no one that got the entry level role to
right.
fix it. So while I haven't
Mm-hmm.
seen Industry 5.0 specifically talk about it in this language, a natural evolution of this is going to have to be, okay, well, if we're making people centric, and make it Industry 5.0 is people centric, it's both sides. It's making sure that we're up leveling skills and putting people in places for them to succeed, maybe outside of areas where we don't have the job for it anymore. And at the same time, to your point, ensuring that we don't go so far as to remove our training from entry level roles and now suddenly we find ourselves without a human at all.
Sure.
That's going to have to become a natural outcome of that. Yeah, Tom, 100%. But I don't think broadly we've connected the dots yet.
And it's almost like, other aspects of society are almost going to have to adopt something similar, right? So I think, like, even like just changes in education, right? You may have to focus more on where the future in industry in tech are going, right? We keep perpetuating jobs that, to your point, right, maybe require you to start working at a McDonald's versus, hey, I can start, working in the tech industry. um, I think that's going to become more important, right? So society as a whole almost has to change
I
on how
I
we
agree
approach a
with
lot
that.
of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. My
Yeah.
my big worry on that front is actually, um, look, there's that old joke that, take the average person in the room. Half of everybody in the room is dumber than that person, and we joke about it. Ha ha, that's funny. But with you do what you're talking about, right? And suddenly now everyone coming out of, I'm going to call it school, there's no, there's, I don't want to pick on McDonald's, so we'll pick on Arby's. There's no Arby's job anymore, right? There's
Right.
no Wendy's job anymore. There's only that industry's job. There's a lot of people that are not going to have anything.
Hmm.
They're not going to find a role because there is no role anymore.
Yep.
What do we do about them? That's my real question. And I mean, that gets, dovetails maybe too much into politics a little bit. So we'll
Yeah.
kind of keep that. So we'll just keep it an open-ended question. But to your point, society is going to have to answer that question
Yep.
somehow.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
Yeah. And
Look at something as simple as cash for clunkers, right? You look at my son's turning 11 this year, right? And I
mhm,
look back to when I turned 16, and as soon as I turned 16, literally the day my birthday, I'm out there looking for a job.
me too.
Minimum wage I think was like 5.75 an hour. I got a job for 8. Cool, right?
Nice. Yeah, right. Good job.
Went to my learner's permit classes, right? Took my classes and the written and the practical, and by 16 and a half I had my license, and
Yep.
$2,100 later I got a 1990 beat up pickup truck, and I was out on the road. You're not buying a car today for a first time car for 2 grand. You're just
Mm-mm,
not.
No.
mm-mm.
All the something programs like, and again I don't want to dive into the politics, but programs like Cash for Clunkers took a lot of those older cars off the road, completely, destroyed them. So yes, that's good from a safety standpoint, and from a, because I mean I tell you, I've been in a couple. I think I've been in one really bad accident, and if it wasn't for the
Same
fact that it was
one.
literally in a brand new car, I shouldn't have walked away from that. I mean,
Mm,
that car flipped. It landed on its side. I can't, to this day, I can't not think about how heavy a car door feels without remembering lifting the car door up over my head to climb
mm,
out of the car, right?
mm-hmm.
And it was because I was in a brand new car with a lot of safety features that I was able to get myself out of the car to begin with,
Sure.
and survive. But that first clunker that I had, that little beater, no, I wouldn't have
Yeah,
survived that.
no
So from a
way.
safety
Yeah.
standpoint and from emissions and everything else, I get why they do it. But at the same time, makes it a lot harder for those kids to get their first cars. So it's society has to figure out where that happy medium is, and adjust things to try to get somewhere.
Yeah, and the thing I feel like, right, is, it's always been this way, but the political answer or the societal answer tends to lag the need. So what's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen
Yep.
is the need is going to get loud first, and then suddenly we're going to be looking back on, okay, how do we fix this? Um, and that gap is going to be painful for a lot of people, and that's to your point on the cash for clunkers front, right? There were unintended consequences to that decision that allows you to argue both sides of the argument, right?
Yep.
Look, you took these old cars off the roads, nothing that's affordable for these kids anymore. Yeah, but a guy like Brian Young is here today because we did that, and if he wasn't in a new car, he'd be dead today. So, there are, again, same thing here. There are going to be unintended consequences, but the one thing we know is that there is going to be a reduction in the number of roles available that individuals that kind of that's their peak of their career. And it's okay because we need them today.
Mhm.
But when suddenly we don't need them because we've now got ways to fix it without it, you need an answer. And I don't
Yeah.
know, we have no systems in place whatsoever to answer that at all. Um, to your
And
point,
I'll add
yeah,
to what you were saying, that the evolution of the technology and the whole mantra of move fast and break things, right?
yep,
That's going to be what brings up those
yes,
needs. And
you
then those
got it.
needs are gonna get louder, and then policy and everything else after that follows. But especially, I mean, cause bringing this back to the AI conversation, it's only been mainstream for a quarter or two, and it's already breaking things.
Already
So,
Yeah.
breaking things.
and it's breaking a lot. It's
It
breaking
is.
a lot.
It is. It's breaking a lot. I read an email yesterday or an article, I guess it was, where, and I don't remember the specifics, but some large, very large law firm with something like 70,000 lawyers or whatever are actually not ChatGPT straight up, but they bought rights to a model that enables them to, it sounds like, replace all of what the paralegals tend to do today. What are
Oh.
you going to do? You're going to just simply, uh, you know, I mean, think about that. Gone.
Yeah.
And no, the smartest paralegal in the planet can't do it at the speed the model does. That's the scary part. It's not even like, well, we'll just get smarter. No, yeah, no amount of it doesn't matter because
Yeah.
it can do it faster and more accurate.
And 24 hours a day, 7 days a
And
week.
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Doesn't need benefits, doesn't get sick, doesn't get tired. Maybe it gets over capacity. We'll just add some more CPU
Might
to
get
it
a virus. Might get sick. Could get a virus. You
and
never know.
disk.
Well, let
Yeah,
me
there you
tell you,
go. Right.
I
Just
was not
restore it from
expecting.
yesterday's backup. Test your backups, kids.
I'll tell you, I was not expecting to go down these various rabbit holes, but you know what? That's what makes this show great. And I know, David, you started off with when we were getting ready to go here, like how long do you need this to be? And I'm like, doesn't matter. We can go as long as we want. People want to stop listening. That's fine. So if you made it this far, awesome on you. Definitely longest episode I think we've recorded, but I think full of information and hopefully full of some laughs and information that you can take to help you out.
Hopefully.
As with everything we talked about, I know David name dropped a few of the Cisco products, Cisco ISE, Cisco Cybervision, or just anything in IoT, OT related. If there's something that you want to learn more about and how Cisco is functioning in this capacity, reach out to your Cisco account team. David, you cover a pretty wide area in terms of geographically in the U.S. As an overlay, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I cover manufacturing as a PSS as a vertical. So yeah, I have no restrictions to cover accounts basically anywhere in U.S., Canada, or Latin America officially, but most of my stuff is in U.S. and Canada because my Portuguese and Spanish are not good.
Well, there you go. So, maybe you'll be blessed with the presence of Mr. Gutshall here because he is an awesome resource and full of knowledge and experience. So, um, David, any final words? Any parting thoughts before we wrap this one up?
Nope. I guess I'll leave you guys with this. Well, first of all, thank you for the compliments, and I'll give you an anecdote on that front, and that is the more I learn and the quote unquote more things that I figure out in life, the more I realize how dumb I really am. So it's like, yeah, it's just crazy, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I'm so clueless on that topic. But no, just thank you everybody. Again, to your point, Brian, if you made it this far, I can't possibly fathom why. But yeah, great to do this today, and thank you for the invite. And I enjoyed it maybe more than I should have. So perhaps it goes back to that early in career. I guess I'll name drop. It was on AM 910 WSBA in good old York, Pennsylvania. There you go. That's your nugget for listening the whole time. You get to find out where that was.
It's our secret code is AM 910
Right,
WSBA.
right.
Awesome. Well, David, thank you again for coming on. Tom, as always, thanks for being here, and thank you for listening and or watching this episode of CompT with your SE. Be sure, as always, to stay safe out there. Don't forget to save that config.